Rebecca Walsh tugged anxiously at the hem of her emerald silk dress, a luxury she couldn't afford, but had defended as an investment for her cousin's extravagant wedding. She sipped while sitting by herself at table 19, which was essentially in a different zip code than the main table. Champagne, and battled the well-known pain of loneliness that had become her unwanted companion since she became a single mother. Throughout the Penny, her 5-year-old daughter, was having a blast at the Grand Harbor Hotel's glitzy ballroom, twirling with the other flower girls, while Rebecca's aunt kept an eye on them. This affair was being enjoyed by at least one of them. "You appear to be, we're planning a way out," a deep voice said from behind. "I've been considering the kitchen exit myself." With her champagne almost spilling over the rim of her flute, Rebecca turned to face Jackson Hayes, her immediate superior at Meridian. She has spent 3 years working as a mid-level editor at Y Publishing. 6 feet 3 inches with a jawline and bourbon-colored eyes. He was the last person she anticipated seeing at her cousin Melissa's wedding. "Mr. Hay," she stammered, painfully aware of her smudged lipstick and the tiny tear in her dress she'd hastily repaired this morning. "What are you doing here?" Rebecca tried not to notice how his normally serious face changed when he grinned. He pointed to the bride and groom and said, "Jackson, please, we're not at work." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "Holmes and I were roommates at Dartmouth. I'm shocked we haven't met up at their functions before." Her cousin's new husband, Thomas, had always traveled in circles that were far different from her own humble Brooklyn life. Jackson Hayes, publishing wizard, CEO and purported billionaire, age 35. I shouldn't have surprised her because I was a member of that environment. "May I?" he inquired. She nodded, suddenly acutely aware of her surroundings, pointing to the empty chair next to her at the otherwise empty table. Despite the fact that her office was only 2 floors below his, Jackson Hayes had hardly talked to her in 3 years. He had always been courteous but aloof throughout their few encounters, which had been confined to crammed elevator trips and sporadic company-wide meetings. "Are you Rebecca Walsh, encircled by an unbreakable entourage of executives?" "Yes, acquisitions and development." "You know who I am," he said, casually settling into the chair while wearing a custom tuxedo that made all the other guys in the room appear to be rentals. His smile deepened, displaying a dimple in his right cheek that she had never seen before. "I make it my job to. The Montana Sky series you purchased last year is surpassing forecasts by 28%. Get to know the people behind our most promising titles." Rebecca blinked, stunned for a time. Convinced that the romance series would appeal to readers despite its unidentified creator, she had battled for months to get it approved. That Jackson Hayes not. She felt a surge of professional pride because she was the only one who knew about it and had monitored its effectiveness. "I trusted those books, thank you. But that doesn't explain why you're sitting with me at the depressing singles table, rather than up there with Jackson's demeanor changed as he saw Thomas and the A-list visitors. There was a moment of vulnerability before. Perhaps I'm sick of folks who only see the CEO and not the person. Before Rebecca could. In response, a disturbance broke out at the dance floor's edge, leaving her daughter Penny motionless and her flower girl. "Excuse me," Rebecca began, her dress smeared with what looked to be crimson wine, tears welling in her large blue eyes as a server apologized sincerely. Jackson gently caressed her arm as she was already halfway out of her chair. "Let me," he whispered, pulling a monogrammed document from his pocket. "Handkerchief. I have nieces." Before she could object, he walked over to Penny and said, "I'm good at this. Steps." Rebecca was shocked to see the formidable CEO of Meridian Publishing bow down to her daughter's level, magically created a quarter from behind her ear, causing Penny's eyes to enlarge, and then winked conspiratorially as she presented the handkerchief. In a matter of seconds, Jackson was dabbing at Penny's dress while she giggled, averting the issue. And when they got back to the table, Penny was chatting animatedly about how Mr. Jackson had promised her the stain was actually invisible ink that only brave flower girls could see. "Mom, may I return to Aunt Claire?" Penny said. "We're having a dance competition." Children are resilient and have already forgotten the experience. "Of course, sweetheart." Rebecca glanced to Jackson, who had returned to his seat next to her, as Penny skittered out. "Just be careful with your dress." "Thank you for that. It's astonishing how well you get along with kids. My sister is a mother of twins, 7 years old, and covered in sticky stuff all the time." He shrugged, but his loving gaze followed Penny. "Your girl is amazing. Your smile is on her face." Something softened inside Rebecca. "I'm grateful. She and her father are the greatest things in my life." The query was informal, yet his eyes were scrutinizing. Not in the image. Rebecca's tone made it obvious that the subject was off limits. 3 years have passed, and counting. Jackson accepted the barrier with a nod. They were awkwardly silent for a moment before he turned to look at the dance floor, where couples were swaying, under swirling garlands of white roses and sparkling chandeliers. He said, "Would you like to dance?" As Rebecca's beside their table, cousin Melissa emerged, looking a little breathless in her bridal gown. "Becky, there you are." Melissa's eyes bounced between Rebecca and Jackson, her face displaying a lackluster display of inquiry. "I had no idea that you were acquainted." "We collaborate." Rebecca gave a brief explanation. "One of our best editors is Rebecca." With a smooth addition, Jackson got up to give Melissa a cheek kiss. "Your relative has a remarkable talent for telling relatable stories." Melissa looked at Rebecca with admiration, her well-groomed eyebrows rising. "You ought to have said something, though. You're seated throughout the when you ought to be up with us. You're back here." She turned to look at Jackson. "And in 20 minutes, you, sir, are expected to make a toast." Jackson scowled. "Thomas is searching everywhere for you." "I'm afraid duty calls." Melissa took off to welcome other visitors. Rebecca was taken aback by the intensity of the disappointment she felt. Jackson lowered his voice specifically for her and said, "Save me a dance?" Her phone rang with a message before she could respond. Text. Rebecca felt the blood leave her face as she looked down. Jackson interrupted. "What's wrong?" Her fear. "This is my babysitter for the evening. She has been canceled. A family crisis." Rebecca's thoughts were racing. I had to either take Penny home or find someone else. But she's having so much fun, and my flat is an hour away. Jackson paused, then leaned in. "Here at the hotel, I have a suite for after the acceptance. If you need to stay over, you and Penny might use it." Rebecca gazed at him, attempting to decipher his intentions, but saw only sincere worry on his face. He interrupted. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose Rebecca." Softly. "Tonight, I'll be staying at Thomas's family's house with a few old college pals. Otherwise, the suite would remain vacant." She faltered. A photographer walked up to their table, unsure. He happily exclaimed, "Let's get one of the happy couple," obviously mistaking them for a couple. Before Rebecca could correct him, under the table, Jackson's hand found hers. He mumbled something as he leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "That would alter everything. Just for the wedding, act like I'm your spouse tonight. It will be simpler than describing, and I've observed how your Rebecca halted, her heart pounding in her ears. Cousin's friends look at you, the pitying glances when they think you're not watching. This was her boss. This was improper, and this could only cause problems. The logical portion of her brain screamed. However, a different portion. The portion that had withstood 3 years of lonely dinners, of sympathetic glances at school events, of attempting to be Penny's mother and father. That bit was spoken, only banal. Before she could change her mind, she heard herself add, "All right, just for tonight. Wouldn't it be nice to pretend?" With a triumphant and promising smile, he put his arm around her waist and pulled her in for the picture. "Believe me," he whispered, "nobody will be feeling sorry for Rebecca Walsh by dawn." What neither of them was able to. It was well known that a single fake evening would reveal truths that both had concealed for years. Secrets that might either unite or rip them apart together indefinitely. Character development and conflict make up Block 2. Rebecca's evening changed remarkably quickly. An hour after Jackson's whispered proposal, she was drawn into a disorienting role as his alleged spouse. With every minute that went by, the facade that had started out as a defense against sympathy developed into something more intricate. Jackson played the part with seamless charm, guiding her through chats with New Yorks, while his palm rested lightly on the small of her back. Top presenting her as the astute editor responsible for maintaining Meridian's bestseller list. "You're surprisingly talented." At this, she murmured as they swayed on the dance floor, careful to maintain a respectable distance despite his hand warm against her waist. In that dancing, his amused eyes wrinkled. At pretending. Most CEOs I've met couldn't act their way out of a paper bag. Jackson gently swung her around as she examined his face, looking for holes in the facade, returning her a little closer than before. "Who says I'm acting?" With so many ramifications, Rebecca dared not ask the question that hovered between them. "Examine." She shifted the topic. "Your toast was lovely. I had no idea you and Thomas were so close." Flared on Jackson's face, a hint of an unidentified emotion. He hesitated. What changed? Time and circumstances have a way of creating distance, even between old friends. Relationships are altered by success because people either anticipate certain things from you or think you've changed when you haven't. You don't treat me like I'm made of money, which is why this is refreshing. Rebecca chuckled quietly. His startled laugh echoed. "That's because I've seen you spill coffee all over yourself when the elevator jerked between floors last Christmas." Jackson's smile softened as he said, "You remember that? It's hard to forget the CEO of Meridian Publishing cursing like a sailor while wearing a reindeer tie." "You see, that's precisely what I mean." As the dance came to a conclusion, Penny was yawning a lot by the dessert table, and Rebecca thought, "I should get her to bed. It's well past her bedtime." Jackson quietly nodded, giving her a keycard. 1217 Suite. "I'll make explanations if someone asks, but take your time." She murmured, "Thank you," but her words were insufficient to express the peculiar care he had shown her and Penny all evening. 30 minutes later, after putting a tired Penny in one of the 2 bedrooms of the suite, Rebecca stood in the luxurious living room of Jackson's hotel, feeling hopeless. Out of place, the suite had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Manhattan cityscape and was larger than her whole Brooklyn apartment. In an attempt to comprehend the strange turn her evening had taken, she kicked off her shoes and padded to the window, resting her palm against the cool glass. She was surprised by a gentle knock on the door. "Sorry to intrude," Jackson murmured, his bow tie undone and dangling free around his neck when she opened it. Instead of going inside, he stood in the doorway and said, "I forgot my overnight bag." "Oh, of course." Suddenly aware of her bare feet and somewhat untidy look, she moved aside to let him in. Jackson took a leather duffel out of the closet, then hesitated, appearing hesitant to go. "How's Penny?" "Out like a light. She's never slept anywhere prettier than here. She believes that we are in a castle for princesses." "Jackson, "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, his smile turning cautious as the comfortable friendliness of their chat on the dance floor faded. Rebecca inquired. "The pretending, the sweet," she said, unable to stop the query. "You're asking what's in it for me, even though it's generous." He put down his bag, his face unreadable. "If I told you that I was simply being nice, would you believe me?" "Based on my observations, guys, strong guys in particular don't act kindly without cause." In his gaze, something solidified. "It says more about the men you've encountered than it does about me." "Rebecca." She defensively crossed her arms. "I'm being careful, and you can't blame me. Jackson, you are my employer. The entire circumstance is complex. Is it the reason you've declined every promotion I've given you in the last 2 years?" Rebecca looked at him, truly taken aback. "What are you discussing?" Jackson further disheveled his dark hair by running a hand through it. "Rebecca, 3 times. 3 I've given my approval for you to be promoted to senior editor with a sizable raise on several occasions. And you've turned them down 3 times without even talking to HR about it." The floor seemed to have tipped under her. "Feet. That is not feasible. I never got any offers for promotions." Jackson became motionless. "What did you just say?" "At Meridian, I have never once received a promotion offer." Understanding appeared on each of their faces at the same time, and the quiet between them grew more intense. They each said, "Daniel Morgan." The person directly above Rebecca in Meridian's hierarchy is Daniel Morgan, editorial director. A man whose hatred for her was evident from day one, who also happened to be Jackson's oldest buddy and had repeatedly claimed credit for her purchases. 1. "He told me you weren't interested in advancement," Jackson murmured slowly, his jaw twitching, "that you liked your current job because of Penny, due to the adaptability it provided." Rebecca saw a chilly rage rising within her, and you thought Jackson's face darkened. "But that ends Monday morning. He's been with Meridian since before I took over. We've known each other for 20 years. How is his career at Meridian going? I've known for some time that Daniel has been taking advantage of circumstances. But today was the first time I've heard Jackson's voice sound flat. Crosses a boundary." Overwhelmed, Rebecca collapsed onto the edge of the couch, thinking, "This explains so much. The way he's been undermining me, moving my projects to other editors." She glanced up at Jackson. The peculiarity of their circumstances was briefly overshadowed by her professional irritation. "Did you know that he delegated the Montana Sky author to Brett in romance? Just last week, after I spent more than a year developing that relationship?" Jackson's face changed from one of rage to, "Something more calculated? Is that the reason you took your first sick day in 3 years on Friday?" Heat rose to Rebecca's cheeks, and I wanted time to think about how much that series meant to me. Jackson sat next to her, making sure there was room between them, and I was unaware that this was taking place. "However, it ends now." He paused, then spoke more softly. "For what it's worth." She was taken aback by the earnestness in his words, and realized that this wasn't the far-off boss she had seen in. In this was someone else entirely, a man accepting responsibility and expressing sincere regret, rather than the endearing phony husband from the reception or business meetings. "Why are you so concerned?" Before she could stop herself, she inquired, "I'm just one editor among dozens." Jackson gazed. "Because I began as an editor too before the MBA, before the corporate ladder," he said, his profile stark against the city lights outside the window. "I am aware." He turned back to her, his eyes focused, and said, "What does it mean to love books, to fight for stories you believe in? Additionally, since I've observed your work from a distance, Rebecca, the writers you find." She was initially stunned by the unexpected remark. "The manuscripts you champion, they're always something special." A tiny voice from the bedroom doorway said, "Mommy, I had a bad dream," before she could think of a reply. Clutching the plush rabbit she had owned since childhood, she stood there in her Disney princess pajamas, her eyes widening upon seeing Jackson. "Mister, did you coming for a sleepover, Magic Man? Also?" Rebecca tensed, but Jackson smoothly knelt to Penny's level. "No, my dear. To make sure you and your mother were comfortable, I stopped by. I heard you had a bad dream," Penny said with a grave nod. "There was a dragon under the bed." Jackson concurred, mirroring her tone. Somber tone. "However, I am aware that dragons are extremely terrified of courageous flower girls, particularly those that possess magical abilities. I am not aware of any," Penny muttered, "magic," but curiosity had already taken the place of her terror. "Yes, you do." Jackson pulled a quarter out of his pocket, the same tactic he'd employed before. "Do you recall this?" Rebecca watched them with a tightening lump in her throat as Jackson carefully demonstrated the basic sleight of hand to Penny. Her daughter, who is typically bashful around strangers, particularly men, was laughing and clumsily trying to imitate Jackson's gestures. Rebecca was particularly taken aback by Jackson's calm patience and the way he supported each endeavor with sincere warmth rather than arrogance. When Penny eventually figured out the technique, or as close to it as a 5-year-old could, "Now the dragon will be scared of me," she said, her face beaming with triumphant glee. "Absolutely terrified," Jackson added. After 2 more demonstrations of her new magical abilities and a thorough dragon inspection, Penny said, "Want me to check under the bed, just to be sure?" When Rebecca went back to the living room after tucking her back into bed, she saw Jackson standing by the window once more, his demeanor thoughtful. "Thank you." "You didn't have to be so kind to her," she said. "It wasn't kindness." He looked at her and said, "I liked it. She's a remarkable." Rebecca paused before continuing. "Child, she is. Her father has never met her. He was gone before I even knew I was." I used to believe that Jackson was pregnant, but his demeanor was scrupulously neutral. Rebecca slid back onto the sofa. In all honesty, it was probably best that Michael wasn't a father figure. Was he violent? Her query was tactful but direct. She didn't touch anyone. Instead, she just looked for the proper words. Self-centered, cunning. She laughed bitterly as I paid all the bills, confident that his big break as a musician was just around the corner. Ironically, 6 months after walking out, he did eventually land the record deal. Jackson's eyes lit up with understanding when I saw his face on a billboard in Times Square last year. "Your ex is Michael." Jackson sat next to Delaney. "You know his music. My niece is obsessed with his last album," Rebecca said, nodding in amazement. Rebecca said, "No wonder you're wary of men with ambition." The statement was too true to be comforting. Jackson's eyes met hers. "It's getting late. You should go before people start talking. Let them talk." The question hung between them, full of implied meanings, unless you wanted me to leave. Rebecca briefly entertained the idea of asking him to stay, not as her boss or her fictitious spouse, but as the man who, throughout this weird evening, had shown her glimpses of someone worth getting to know. Instead, she stood, placing the appropriate distance between them. "This has been unexpected, but we should remember who we are on Monday morning." Jackson got up too, grabbed his overnight bag, and stopped at the door. He left Rebecca before she could reply, saying, "You know, you never answered my question from earlier about whether I was really pretending." Alone with the question that would keep her up all night, and the increasing worry that this disguise might have aroused emotions that neither of she was unaware that Jackson Hayes had secrets of his own that would soon jeopardize everything they had started to construct. The hard reality of Monday morning dawned, and Rebecca entered Meridian Publishing's shining lobby, with Penny's warm, sticky farewell kiss still on her cheek and her mind racing with inquiries regarding the events of the weekend. On Sunday, she had alternated between scrutinizing each moment with Jackson and adamantly reminding. The elevator doors opened to reveal Daniel Morgan himself, his convenient setup, and she realized that it had all been an act. "I see that Rebecca recovered from your illness," despite her always arrogant smile being unpleasant at the sight of her, refused to be intimidated, and entered. "Good morning, Daniel. I'll need the Mitchell manuscript on my desk by noon. The marketing team has questions." "Yes, thank you for your concern," he sneered, not trying to hide his contempt. The Mitchell manuscript was another of Rebecca's finds that Daniel had claimed for himself, but she kept her professional grin on her face despite the familiar twist of annoyance. Daniel's smile tightened, but I should point out that the author specifically asked for my input on the new chapters. I'm sure you can forward any pertinent notes to me. The elevator came to a stop at the editing floor. Daniel said, as Rebecca made her way out. She noticed something in Hayes's tone when he said, "Oh, and the quarterly review meeting has been moved up. Hayes wants all department heads in the conference room at 10 o'clock. Only department leaders," Daniel said with an ugly smirk. "Don't worry your pretty little head about executive matters, Rebecca." The doors shut. Rebecca was furious in the corridor after seeing his patronizing demeanor. The man had been undermining her career for years, and she had allowed him, partially out of a single mother's anxiety about upsetting everyone, in part because, before Jackson's disclosure, she had no evidence of his manipulation. At precisely 9:57, a text from an unknown number rang Rebecca's phone at 10 a.m. in the conference room. Her pulse skipped a beat as she read the message, wondering how Jackson had obtained her personal number. "Don't be late, Jay. Most importantly, why was he calling her to a department head-only meeting?" At 10:01, Rebecca slipped into Meridian's executive team had already gathered in the conference room. Jackson sat at the head of the table, and Daniel's expression first showed disbelief, then hardly disguised anger at her appearance. Flawless in a black suit, not at all like the laid-back man who had given her daughter magic tricks 2 nights prior. "M. Walsh, thank you for joining us," Jackson replied in a formal tone that lacked the warmth she had come to expect from their masquerade. "Please have a seat," selected the only chair that was available right across from Daniel, whose suspicious gaze was now flitting between her and Jackson. Before we started, Jackson looked around the room and said, "I'd like to announce some organizational changes effective immediately. Daniel Morgan will be leaving his position as editorial director. He is strong and uncompromising." There is a startled stillness. Daniel's face went white as it descended over the conference room. Meanwhile, while we consider options for permanent restructuring, Rebecca Walsh will take over his responsibilities. Daniel partially got up from his chair across the table while Amanda froze, sure she had misheard. "This is ridiculous. On what grounds?" "For purposefully interfering with business activities, denying qualified employees the chance to advance and fabricating messages to upper management." Jackson cut off his tone. "HR will go over the comprehensive report that my office has put together with you after whispers arose around Rebecca, as she remained immobile during this meeting, while Jackson carried on with merciless efficiency, describing marketing plans and quarterly forecasts as though he hadn't just set off a bomb in her career. She sensed Daniel's poisonous look, threatening to exact revenge. After the conference was adjourned, Jackson asked that Daniel, stayed at the doorway as the room began to empty, his face black with anger. "You'll regret this," Hayes, he muttered. Both of you will. Rebecca looked to Jackson when the door shut, and they were left alone. The only indication that the encounter had affected him was the tiny loosening of his tie. What just happened? He said. Justice, I hope, though perhaps I should have warned you first. Perhaps. Rebecca found it difficult to maintain a level voice. You just made me feel like a target in front of the whole executive team. Daniel and I both have influential acquaintances in this field. Jackson's face softened a little. The job you've done in spite of Daniel's meddling shows you're more than competent, but that's not the point. Rebecca, you deserve this promotion 3 times over. This looks like favoritism, Jackson. People will talk, she said, rubbing her temples as a headache began to form. The words hovered between them. Let them. Your work will speak for itself. Easy for you to say. You're not the single mother who suddenly appears to be sleeping her way up the corporate ladder. Jackson whispered quietly, Is that what you think this is? With a shuddering face. Is that what you think this is? Rebecca sighed instantly, regretting her outburst. No, but it's what other people would think. Which is precisely why I asked HR to carefully examine Daniel's correspondence before making Jackson move a document across the table, demonstrating his methodical repression of any announcements. Advancement. Dated and recorded. This promotion is based only on merit, and anyone who argues otherwise will find herself in a really awkward discussion with legal. Rebecca opened the folder and was astounded by the extensive document trail that had been assembled in a single day. How could you acquire everything so fast? I've been suspicious about Daniel for months. Your circumstances are just me the impetus to conduct a thorough investigation. This has nothing to do with this weekend. He hesitated. I promise you, Rebecca. His sincere look made her want to trust him. Thank you. However, this doesn't address the real-world issues. Have a 5-year-old daughter named Jackson. The editorial director role necessitates travel, late nights, and weekend work. Before she could reply, he leaned over and said, You can set the precedent. Meridian needs to modernize its approach to working parents anyway. Jackson's helper knocked and came in. Mr. Hayes, Ms. Walsh from HR will like to see you at 11 o'clock to go over the specifics of the changeover. Broken, Rebecca gathered her belongings and halted at the door, saying, For what it's worth, thank you for believing in me. Jackson gave a fleeting but sincere smile. Rebecca, prove me correct. That's all the gratitude I require. As Rebecca adjusted to her new position, the ensuing weeks flew by. In keeping with his, although the task still left Penny fatigued most evenings, she saw that Jackson had made sure her position included flexibility for her schedule. 3 weeks after her promotion, Rebecca was working late. She didn't have much direct contact with the CEO. Their interactions were restricted to formal meetings, where he upheld strict professionalism. She was examining contracts for a significant acquisition when her new office door was knocked on. With his suit jacket thrown aside and his sleeves pushed up to show off his powerful forearms, Jackson stood at the threshold. Are you still here? He leaned against the doorframe and inquired, Where is Penny this evening? Rebecca put down her pen and said, Sleep over with her cousin. Suddenly conscious of the late hour and their isolation on the otherwise deserted executive floor. I'm taking advantage of the uncommon freedom to catch up. He nodded, his eyes showing comprehension. Have you eaten? She was taken aback by the inquiry. I had a granola bar at around 6 o'clock. He straightened and said, Come on, that's not dinner. There's a Thai place around the corner that stays open late. And Rebecca hesitated and said, I don't think that's a good idea, Jackson. It's just food, Rebecca. Between co-workers, his countenance remained cautiously neutral. Despite her better judgment, she found herself 20 minutes later. They sat in a peaceful booth in the rear of a small restaurant, enjoying the strong aroma of lemongrass. As they talked about manuscripts and industry rumors outside of the office, some of the animosity between them subsided. "You've done remarkable work these past weeks. The Morrison deal alone would have justified your promotion," Jackson remarked as they were finishing their supper. Rebecca grinned and felt proud in her achievements. "It feels good to finally have the authority to back my instincts." Speaking of authority, Jackson put down his fork and said, "There's something you should know. Daniel has been meeting with executives at Paragon Press." Jackson's voice sharpened. "You believe he's giving them information?" "I know he is." Rebecca's stomach nodded. Paragon was Meridian's largest rival. "He is specifically attempting to get your writers to violate their contracts and relocate to Paragon. But he is unable to do so and is blatantly violating the non-compete clause in his severance." Jackson groaned. "Yes." Sadly, Rebecca pushed her plate away, her hunger gone, proving it involves catching him in the act, which is proving challenging. That matches the pattern. Yesterday, the author from Montana Sky contacted to let me know that she had received a higher offer, but she wouldn't reveal from whom. Jackson reached over. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed you to know what we're up against." I touched her hand for a moment before stepping back from the table. Rebecca forced herself to concentrate on the business threat instead of the perplexing tug she felt toward him as the touch of his hand on hers lingered like a brand. Jackson's eyes shone with resolve. "What do we do?" "We fight back." And starting with this weekend's literary retreat in the Catskills, Jackson continued, "I can't possibly, Penny, bring her. That's in 3 days." Rebecca blinked. "Simply put, this retreat is essential to maintaining our connection, and the resort offers first-rate childcare facilities. With important writers. If Daniel is acting, we have to stop him right away." "Jackson, I can't just— I'm not asking as your boss right now. I'm asking as someone who believes in you," he said, softening his voice. She felt a complex chill as he responded. "We need you there. You know what you're capable of." 3 days in the mountains with Jackson, with Penny in tow, surrounded by writers and business people. The idea was both thrilling and frightening. Finally," she added. "I need to make arrangements." His smile in response was worth the logistical hassle she anticipated. On Friday afternoon, Rebecca and Penny checked into Lakeview Lodge. They had to go through the check-in process by themselves because the retreat's welcome reception was already in progress in the main hall of an expensive resort, tucked away among the beautiful mountains of fall. The receptionist remarked, "I'm sorry, Miss Walsh, but we don't have a reservation under your name," with practiced remorse. "That's not possible," Rebecca scowled. A block of rooms was reserved by Meridian Publishing. The woman double-checked. "I should be on the list with the other editors. I'm displaying every Meridian room as assigned, but Walsh doesn't have any, and I'm sorry we're completely booked this weekend with the retreat and a wedding." Penny pulled on Rebecca's blazer, saying, "Mom, I'm hungry. You promised dinner." Rebecca experienced a headache, sprouting behind her eyes. Following a hectic preparation day and a 3-hour journey with a fidgety 5-year-old, the last thing she needed was a complication. "Is there another motel nearby? Not within 30 miles. I'm scared." Rebecca's anxiety increased despite the receptionist's kind smile. "Leaf season is our busiest time." What appears to be the issue? Jackson's deep, worried voice came from behind her. Rebecca turned to see him coming from the reception, unreasonably attractive in casual clothes, black trousers, and a blue pullover that highlighted the range of his shoulders. She clarified that there was an error in the reservation. "Apparently, I don't have a room." as she struggles to keep her professional composure. Jackson's brow furrowed. That's not possible. I personally verified the reservations yesterday. The receptionist's eyebrows grew slightly as she realized the CEO. Mr. Hayes, I promise that we have allotted the rooms that your company has requested. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Rebecca had a dreadful notion. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all, she whispered to Jackson. Jackson's gaze clouded with understanding as he turned to face Daniel, who still has contacts in administrative support, returning to the receptionist with a fresh sense of purpose. How about my lodging? I think I'm in the suite by the lake. The 2-bedroom presidential suite, sir. Jackson gave a firm nod. Perfect. Ms. Walsh will be staying there with her daughter. Please make arrangements for her bags to be taken up right away. Once the receptionist left, Rebecca objected, saying, Jackson, no. We can't share a suite. It's inappropriate. Unless you'd rather drive back to the city, he thought. A 2-bedroom suite with a living area larger than my first apartment was totally appropriate. Penny, who had been silently watching the conversation, suddenly became alert. Are we spending a stay with Mr. the Magic Man? Hello there, Brave, Jackson said, crouching to Penny's level as his serious gaze softened into a friendly smile. I heard you might teach me some new magic tricks this weekend, Flower Girl. Penny excitedly began to describe the card trick. Rebecca observed the exchange with a growing sense of both thankfulness and anxiety after learning about it via a YouTube video. She was more concerned about Jackson's deft manipulation of her into a situation that would undoubtedly cause concern among their co-workers. The three of them together felt so natural, like a cohesive unit, that she had long since ceased allowing herself to desire. After that, Jackson stated, "Shall we go find some dinner for this hungry magician?" he said, rising up and extending his hand to Penny. As they made their way to the eatery, Rebecca was unable to shake the sense that they were being watched, and when she turned to look behind them, she saw a man with a familiar face watching them closely from across the lobby. Daniel Morgan, who had just arrived at the retreat, recognized him immediately, even though they had never met in person. Rebecca whispered to Jackson, "Don't look now, but we have company," as the expression in his eyes suggested that her difficult weekend had just turned perilous. They took a seat at a corner table in the resort's dining area, and she subtly cocked her head in the direction of Daniel Morgan's entry while carefully surveying the space. Let him observe. We have nothing to conceal. Jackson's face tightened for a moment before he calmed down. Don't we? Rebecca assisted Penny with her menu, fully conscious of how the three of them, Penny included, must appear to bystanders. Jackson assisted her in sounding out the longer words on the children's menu while she chatted animatedly. A tall woman with gracefully streaked gray hair came over to their table before Jackson could reply, her face beaming with real happiness. She turned her warm smile to Rebecca and said, "Hayes, I was starting to think you were avoiding the mingling portion of these events entirely. You must be the I'm a Lelanina Winters. Rebecca Walsh, the new editorial director I've heard so much about, almost dropped her menu. Literary royalty, the best-selling writer who, 15 years ago, made Meridian Publishing famous. Romance series had sold more than 20 million volumes globally. Rebecca was able to offer her congratulations to Ms. Winters. Elena dismissed the formality, saying, "Elena, please. Your work on the Bedford Chronicles inspired me to pursue publishing." "And who is, I'm Penny Walsh, and I know magic," the young girl said with pride. "This young lady?" she inquired, grinning at Penny. Elena chuckled happily. Penny gladly agreed, and Elena said, "What a fortunate coincidence. I'm in desperate need of some magic for my new book. Perhaps you could assist me." Tato gazed between Jackson and Rebecca with astute, perceptive eyes. Before Rebecca could contradict her, she said, "You make a lovely family. How refreshing to see Meridian executives who understand the importance of balance." Eleanor had offered herself to accompany them despite the miscommunication, cleverly portraying their dinner as an unplanned business meeting that prevented other retreat guests, including a furious Daniel, from joining them. During the lunch, Rebecca was more and more impressed with Jackson's ability to adjust to Penny's presence, chopping the chicken into small pieces without being questioned, and conversing with her as organically as he talked to Elelanina about publishing trends. "Your daughter is completely as dessert was served," Eleanor remarked. "Delightful, and quite taken with your husband, if I may say so." Rebecca: "Oh, Jackson isn't—" "We are colleagues," Jackson smoothly interrupted, his eyes finding hers as she almost choked on her water. "Rebecca's with a silent message, but I feel privileged to have known both of these exceptional Walsh women." Elelanina's gaze remained doubtful, but she politely shifted the topic to her next work. She had summoned Rebecca to breakfast the next morning after their parting to talk about a big adjustment in her publishing plans. A private, "That was quite a coup," Jackson said, as they took Penny back to the suite, referring to a meeting that would have often been reserved for Jackson himself. "Elelanina doesn't typically get along with new executives so fast." "She's amazing," Rebecca said, feeling a flush of professional pride as the tiny girl skipped ahead within sight, but out of earshot. "Her work has long been admired by me." With his hands in his pockets, Jackson remarked casually, "She seemed to think we're married." "You were ready to correct her," Rebecca said, giving him a sidelong glance. "Wasn't that the right thing to do? In a strategic manner?" "Maybe not," he said, lowering his voice. "The whole time, Daniel was observing. Your position is greatly strengthened if Eleanor Winters thinks we're a bundle deal. Now, let's return to acting." Rebecca was unable to control the sharpness in her voice. Jackson turned to face her completely and stopped moving. "Do you think I'm doing that? Acting fake?" Her heart fluttered treacherously at the intensity of his stare. Penny saw the indoor pool through glass doors at the end of the passage and cried out before she could reply. The moment broke as they rushed to meet her. After Penny had dozed off in the lovely second bedroom later that evening, in the large living room, Rebecca was by herself with Jackson. With a tumbler of whiskey in hand, he stood by the windows with a view of the moonlit lake. Appearing thoughtful, he said, "You never answered my question." Without looking back about whether you believe I'm acting, Rebecca stepped forward warily, keeping a safe distance. "Jackson, I'm not sure what to think. You're my boss 1 minute, and then you're charming and teaching my daughter magic tricks. Literary figures on my behalf." He looked up at her, his face unguarded in a way she had seldom seen. "Have you thought that each of those things may be just as real?" "Why?" Before she could stop herself, the question leaked out. Why me? Why us? Jackson put down his drink and moved in closer. "Due to something fell into place as soon as I saw you sitting by yourself at that wedding. Something I wasn't searching for, but cannot be disregarded." He seemed less like the self-assured CEO and more like a man who was having trouble expressing himself as he ran a hand through his hair. "Crucial. The way you stand up for your writers, how you raised Penny by yourself, and how, in spite of Daniel's sabotage, you never requested preferential treatment. Rebecca, you are very remarkable." She retreated a little and shook her head. "I was terrified of precisely this. Our working relationship is already complex enough without the addition of sentimental elements. Are you just scared of that? Complications in the workplace?" His tone became softer. "Also, after Michael abandoned you to raise Penny by yourself, are you scared to trust anybody again?" The precise observation was painful. That is unfair. No, it isn't. He got so near that she could smell his fragrance. Seldom is life. However, avoiding opportunities out of fear of harm is a decision. Rebecca sensed her well-built defenses starting to fall apart. I have obligations, Jackson. My top priority must be Penny. Mom, I can't take a chance. From the bedroom doorway came Penny's drowsy voice. I experienced yet another nightmare. Rebecca walked straight to her kid, shattering the moment, embracing her tightly. It's all right, my dear. Only a dream. Once more, the dragon? Jackson stood back and asked softly. Against Rebecca's shoulder, Penny nodded. He was pursuing us. You too, Jackson, mister. That won't work, though. Jackson cautiously moved closer, getting down on his knees. Do you recall what we practiced? Brave magic is intolerable to dragons. As he carefully led Penny through the easy coin trick once more, Rebecca's chest began to hurt as she watched them. Wearing PJ trousers and a t-shirt, this publishing magnate was on his knees, totally preoccupied with consoling her scared youngster. She was finding it harder and harder to keep her emotional distance. Once Penny was settled, when Rebecca went back to bed, she discovered Jackson in the suite's kitchenette making tea. He said, I thought you might need this, and offered her a steaming mug. She embraced it with gratitude, saying, Chamomile. My mother always said it helps with worry. I appreciate everything you've done with Penny. It's simple to care about her. Like her mother, he smiled tenderly. Rebecca took a drink of her tea and used the time to collect her thoughts. Jackson, whatever is going on between us, there are 12 main elements that complicate it. Your job, my advancement, Penny, Daniel's grudge. He leaned against the counter, and I know it. However, I believe it's worthwhile to investigate despite the difficulties, unless you have nothing but professional respect for me. Honesty was required by the direct inquiry. You are aware that is untrue. The atmosphere in the room changed as admission hovered between them. Jackson put down his drink and approached her cautiously. Rebecca. He was cut off by a forceful knock on the charming door. Scowling, Jackson went to respond to it. Before his face clouded, he checked the peephole. A stone-faced security guy was there when he opened the door. Mister, I'm sorry for the late hour, Hayes. However, a situation has been reported that needs your quick response. The conference room where the contract negotiations are scheduled for tomorrow has been accessed by someone who seems to have taken pictures of private documents. Jackson's stance suddenly changed to that of a CEO. The night manager was reviewing security 20 minutes ago. Video right now. Daniel, Rebecca whispered, and Jackson gave a somber nod. I have to deal with this. Remain here. Secure the door. I'll return as soon as I can. Rebecca paced the suite after he departed because she was too wired to sleep, reviewing the day's events and the conversation that had been interrupted. The moment had passed, whatever Jackson was going to say or do before security showed up. At midnight, unsatisfied, she opened her laptop's work emails and saw a fresh message from an unknown address titled Proof of Hayes's Manipulation. Despite her better judgment, she opened it and saw other images attached. She appeared with Jackson and Penny, appearing like a family, in photos that were obviously taken through the restaurant windows earlier that evening using a telephoto lens. The note that came with it was short, but eerie. Did he tell you about the wager? Find out how much money Hayes stands to gain by getting you into his bed by asking him about our Dartmouth wager. A bet? A friend? Rebecca looked at the computer, feeling sick to her stomach. It appeared absurd, but did Jackson's interest in her actually stem from a decades-old fraternity game? Her phone buzzed, How else could the unexpected interest from a man who had hardly noticed her existence for 3 years be explained? It seeped in like poison. Jackson texted me, saying, "Security issue contained. Daniel was caught on camera and escorted from the premises. We'll explain everything in the morning. Sleep well." Rebecca put the phone down without answering, her thoughts replaying the charges in the emails. She needed an explanation. However, it seemed foolish to approach Jackson in the middle of the night in their shared suite. It would be wiser to wait. Sleep proved tough as recollections of their near kiss mixed with the offensive insinuations in the emails until dawn, when she could handle the problem with professional distance. Rebecca made up her mind by daybreak, packed their luggage, got Penny up early, and left Jackson a little letter. Her family's emotional health was in fact at risk, so it wasn't totally a lie to say that they had chosen to go back to the city due to a family emergency. Steak. She had time to reflect on the unsettling charge and her developing feelings for Jackson during the trip back to Brooklyn. Wanted to write off the email as Daniel's last-ditch effort to undermine her. But a part of me, the person Michael had left behind, whispered that men with money and power operating under different rules. Rebecca had made up her mind by Monday morning to face Jackson head-on. She got to work early, preparing herself for the unavoidable meeting, only to discover an urgent message asking her to attend a special board meeting right away. With her heart racing, she went into the boardroom and saw that every member of the executive team was present, with the exception of Jackson, the chief financial officer, who is typically stoic. The sad assembly was addressed by a woman in her 60s. For those who haven't heard the news, Jackson Hayes was engaged in a catastrophic car accident returning from the Catskills retreat early yesterday morning. He's in critical care at Manhattan Memorial right now. As information came in, the room whirled around Rebecca. A guardrail failure, black ice on mountain roads, a serious but stable condition. All she could think was that he had been returning early, probably as a result of her sudden departure. The next 3 days flew by, filled with meetings, hospital visits where she was turned away because she wasn't family, and regret-filled sleepless nights. She had never even offered Jackson an opportunity to clarify the allegations in the emails. Her secretary informed her of an unexpected guest on Thursday afternoon when she was at her office going over contracts with mechanical efficiency. Ms. Hayes, who claims to be Jackson's sister, is here to see you, Walsh. Catherine Hayes, Rebecca said, looking up at a lady who shared Jackson's black hair and bourbon-colored eyes, but lacked his warmth. My brother regained consciousness this morning and has been asking for you. Quite insistently, in fact, the woman said, introducing herself with cold precision. Rebecca felt a wave of relief. Anxiety soon followed. He's conscious. According to the doctors, he will get better. It seems that my brother is too obstinate to pass away before you two settle your differences. Rebecca was uncomfortably reminded of being probed under a microscope by Catherine's evaluative gaze. He made reference to a miscommunication involving an old college wager and Daniel Morgan. Rebecca felt her stomach drop. It's true, then. Catherine's face relaxed a little. I believe Jackson should tell you the whole thing. I have my car waiting below if you want to come to the hospital with me. Rebecca hesitantly stood in the doorway of a private hospital room 45 minutes later. Jackson examined pallid against the white sheets, with his arm in a cast and a bandage covering a portion of his brow, but clearly alive, and be mindful. When he said Rebecca's name, it sounded like a plea as well as a prayer. You arrived. With caution, she walked over to the bed. Your sister has a lot of persuasive power. People are affected in that way by Jonah Catherine. Even though she generally scares them away rather than brings them to my bedside, a ghost of his typical smile materialized. Regarding the email, Jackson, the wager. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Daniel's last effort to put us at odds. It was wise of him to utilize a partial truth instead of a complete fabrication. Rebecca stiffened. Thus, there was a wager. Jackson moved and winced a little in college 20 years ago. Daniel, Thomas, and I were paid absurdly around everything. We wagered on who would be the first to date someone from each floor of the university library one especially inebriated night. Juvenile and objectifying, he looked directly into her eyes. And something I'm not pleased with. But Rebecca, that was the end of it. It has nothing to do with you at all, and I never collected on it. Why, therefore, would Daniel? Because he was aware that it would sound credible enough to cast doubt on me. Jackson extended his unhurt hand to grasp hers. For the past 3 years, Rebecca, I've watched you stand up for writers you support, witnessing your honesty and skill. He caught himself falling in, then proceeded more cautiously, growing fond of you unrelated to ancient history and everything related to your identity. The sincerity in his eyes made her want to believe him. 3 years, but before the wedding we hardly spoke at all, because I was attempting to uphold professional boundaries and because you were under Daniel's supervision. His hold on her hand became tense. I just used the wedding as an excuse to finally come up to you and ask if there might be something worthwhile between us. Rebecca discovered herself at a fork on the road. Put your trust in this man who has only treated her with love and respect, or hide behind the walls that have shielded her since Michael's desertion. At last, she continued, I need you to understand something. Penny is more than just a person in my life. My existence revolves around her. It's a fact that everybody I let near me must acknowledge. Rebecca. Jackson's face softened. I love Penny. Her magic tricks, her incessant questioning, and her dragon fears. She is exceptional, similar to her mom, as well as the difficulties in the workplace. I won't give up the career I've put so much effort into for anything. She paused, not ready to identify what was developing between them, even for myself. Despite his wounds, Jackson was grinning broadly now. I wouldn't anticipate you doing so. Actually, if you did, I would be disappointed. We'll determine what constitutes professional boundaries. Businesses have policies for a purpose. Before Catherine came back, there was a knock on the door. I apologize for interrupting, but someone is really determined to see Jackson. She moved aside to show Penny, who was holding her plush bunny and was nervous. I informed her that you were, Rebecca said, startled. Hurt. She insisted on creating a farewell card for you. She hadn't planned to bring Penny, had left her with a neighbor, but when the young child found out that Mr. Magic Man was in the hospital, she became quite upset. Penny walked carefully over to the bed, and Jackson's countenance brightened. Mister, does it hurt much, Jackson? Less now that you're here, he said softly. I've heard that you brought me something unique. Penny solemnly displayed a homemade card, adorned with crayon dragons and glitter. She muttered, It's magic. To keep the dragons away while you sleep, Jackson said, looking at the card with an exaggerated sense of amazement that made Penny laugh. Rebecca felt the last of her reluctance dissolve at his enthusiastic praise, regardless of the difficulties that lay ahead. The bond between the three of them was too real to ignore, regardless of the obstacles they would have to overcome in their careers. 6 months later, as he followed a laughing Penny across the beach below, Rebecca watched from the terrace of Jackson Hampton's house. The spring air carried as she twisted the engagement ring that had just appeared on her finger last night. She could smell the aroma of salt and fresh starts. Elena Winters came over with champagne flutes in hand after a cautious proposal that had included both her approval and Penny's enthusiastic consent. Once again, congratulations, my love. However, I have to admit that I anticipated this from the retreat's first dinner. Rebecca Elelenena grinned and took the glass. Was it really so clear to anyone with romantic eyes? Elelenena confirmed with a, "I've written enough love stories to be able to identify the one that was happening in front of me." Below, Jackson had lifted Penny onto his shoulders and spun in. Their excitement was contagious, spreading across the distance in circles that threw her into peals of ecstatic laughter. "He's good with her," Eleanor said. "A father who genuinely views a child as a gift rather than a complication is uncommon, you know." Rebecca said, "We're still figuring it out, juggling our personal and professional life, ensuring that Penny is comfortable with all the modifications." Elena patted her hand and said, "Life is never perfectly balanced, dear. But love makes the wobbling worthwhile," she said tenderly. Jackson and Penny walked hand in hand back along the beach as the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Penny started running as soon as she saw Rebecca. "Jackson showed me how to locate sea lass, Mom. We're going to create a gathering." Jackson trailed after at a slower pace, his warm gaze still making Rebecca's pulse skip a beat. She is an innate treasure seeker. When he got to Rebecca, he put his arm around her waist and spoke. Like her mother, she finds worth in places that others don't. Later that evening, when Penny slept in her new bedroom, which was adorned with stars that shone in the dark like magic, Jackson and Rebecca stood on the moonlit terrace. "Any regrets?" he whispered, pulling her in close. Rebecca considered the meandering route that had brought them to this location. From a lonely wedding table to a sick bedside, from difficulties at work to the family they were starting together. "Just one," she remarked, glancing up at him with mischievous eyes, "that we didn't practice our husband-wife masquerade more fully before creating." "It's official." The sound of Jackson's laughter reverberated around the peaceful beach. As his lips met hers beneath the starry sky, "I think we have a lifetime to master that specific performance." For a brief while, Rebecca silently thanked whatever force had brought her to that wedding table by herself. The happiest ends can occasionally come from the most unlikely beginnings, particularly when a little magic is involved.